Let's
Yep.
start because there's so much to cover, and I want to kind of go around the horn. But I thought that we would begin with your latest column, actually, regarding the school lunch program and Michelle Obama. And I always do this to my team, but I'm going to throw a curveball at them because I have a little audio from Michelle Obama, our first lady. And to me, when Michelle speaks, we all listen because she cares about the kids. And she has policies that would obviously speak to that. And she spoke to that earlier this week and the opposition to those policies that were out there. And Jeremy, are you pulling the Michelle Obama clip up? I will cut 28. Why don't we play this? This was earlier this week from our First Lady. Roll it.
We're now seeing efforts in Congress to roll back these new standards and undo the hard work that all of us have done on behalf of our kids. And, this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to me, not just as First Lady, but as a mother. I know that right now, because I have talked to so many parents, so many teachers, so many kids write me every day, and more families are realizing that we are facing a health crisis in this country. We're now realizing that childhood obesity is a real issue. And so many families are looking for help now in their efforts to find new ways to feed their family balanced meals. So moms and dads don't want their efforts undermined when they send their kids off to school. Parents have a right to expect that their kids will get decent food in our schools.
So why would Republicans, I know Republicans hate kids, so that's one reason.
Yeah,
but tell me this, Arnold, you actually go a different direction. She says she's supporting her parents, or the parents out there. She's supporting parents. She gets all these letters. And you're saying she's heavy-handed.
Well, I mean, again, how much do you want the government to do for you? Do you want the government to run every aspect of your life or not? I have no problem with promoting healthy ideas, but I do have a problem with saying this is the way we're going to do it, and that's it. What this thing is all about was the states needed more flexibility as to whether or not they were going to enact these standards, and the GAO report by itself, 1.3 million students from the school year 2010 to 2011 through the school year 2012 to 2013 went off the lunch program. And that was after the program having increased steadily for many years. And, one of the things is that some of these school districts are doing is they're literally cutting into their teacher budgets to pay for these school lunches, even though they've got massive what they call food waste, where the kids put it on their tray, they're not going to eat it, and then they just throw it in the garbage. And then, of course, like I said later on in my column, you always have to get to the real thing that drags progressives down, which is the rank hypocrisy. And I got to tell you, when I went through the menu at the Sidwell School, a hat tip to the person who got it. CNS's News, Barbara Bowen, I got to give her a hat tip because when I was doing my research, she actually came up with what they were eating at the Sidwell School, and I mean, it's remarkable. I don't eat that good in my house.
No, I was looking at Philly cheesesteaks, all-natural beef hot dogs, pepperoni flatbread pizzas, and beef barbecue sliders.
Yeah.
I understand. Catherine's great, and we have great dinners, but I'm really not able to concentrate because I'm thinking of the all-natural beef hot dog. I just can't focus. It's Friday. Come on, don't do that to me.
But, listen, with a little sauerkraut and mustard, I'm with you.
Amen. Amen, brother. But this is what we're talking about. Hey, what's good for me, that's my business. What's good for you is my business.
It's also my business.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know better, and you just can't handle the freedom I have. Is that what it is?
I think that's a lot of it. And again, I always come back to the hypocrisy because it really is hypocritical. I mean, her kids are eating like queens, And you know, the funniest thing, if your audience ever gets a chance to go to it, was that video. I watched the video called "We Are Hungry." That was a music parody video put on YouTube from the kids who were complaining about the school lunches. It got 1.4 million hits, and I got to tell you, I don't know what school kids. I think it was a group of kids in Kansas City. They put together a pretty funny video.
I will post that actually following, and I've got to watch it myself because I saw it and I was like, oh, you know, I just didn't have the time to go to it, and obviously I need to. If it's going to put a smile on my face and make a point, that's a great way to make a point. And so, Arnold, in that we say, okay, they like to control things, and there is hypocrisy, and the programs don't work, and they go back to their silly responses like Republicans don't like kids. You know, and it doesn't matter what political party sit there don't like kids. But now I want to go to judging them and all of us being adults and saying, here's the deal. You have a record, and we're going to ask you about that record. That took place yesterday at the State Department, earlier this week, in an exchange with State Department spokesperson Jane Psaki. And here is part of that exchange, which became the clip of the week. Roll it.
I would argue the president doesn't give himself enough credit for what he's done around the world, and that's how the secretary feels too. We would not be engaged in comprehensive negotiations with Iran, which is where the program is stalled and is rolling back, if it were not for the role of the United States, along with the P5+1 partners, certainly. Ukraine, we've been engaged more or as much as any other country in the world in supporting the elections process and supporting the government and supporting their efforts moving forward. Yes, there's more work that needs to be done. The point is we need to continue to stay at it.
But isn't this a potential mission accomplished situation?
Absolutely not. Yeah.
You would argue the president doesn't give himself enough credit? How much credit would you give him?
Well, I think I would give him more than he has given himself.
Like
That's what I just said.
credit?
So would the secretary.
For
what?
For what? Yes, exactly. That's
No, I mean I don't mean like he
for the
doesn't
Iran
deserve credit.
negotiations?
I mean I'm talking what specifically you're talking he doesn't get enough credit for. That's what I'm saying.
For engagement in issues like Iran, what we've done on Ukraine, efforts to dive in and engage around the world.
Russia has still annexed Crimea. I mean, Iran, there's ongoing negotiations, but is that the successor that you're talking?
We're talking about engagement in the world and taking on tough issues that present themselves, and the United States continues to play a prominent role doing that.
Arnold, I just go to you. You have fun. I mean,
well, first of all, I'd like to say that as long as we have Jen Psaki, Nancy Pelosi, and is probably safe as not being maybe the dumbest woman on the left. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, you got to put in that contest
that's
too.
the
I mean, I take those three right there, and just I'd love to be a fly on the wall when those three are talking to each other. But this is the classic agenda. This is style over substance. We're engaged. Yeah. Well, you're engaged. Well, I mean, with all due respect, what should the commander-in-chief be doing if he's not engaged with some of the more important foreign policy issues of the day? But just being engaged, I don't know what that necessarily means. You know, that's like, yeah, he was engaged in the Illinois Senate too when he voted president over 100 times. So yeah, you're engaged. But what are we accomplishing? I mean, look, is Ukraine a tough situation? Yeah, sure it is. But Iran, I think that lifting the sanctions on Iran was a huge mistake. I think it was the only thing that was even giving them the slightest motivation to come to the table. And now they're just playing us for this with the same game they've been playing literally for 10 years now. This has been going on for 10 years.
Tell me, Arnold, why don't we get more of the types of responses we got from the press regarding that? Because it always seems to me that the press may go the first question hard, may even do the follow-up, but after that, they kind of back off. It's like, oh, okay, it's like a boxer going in, not wanting to knock him out, and then pull back and allow the person to get some good swings in and say, oh, and hug it out. You know, I just don't understand. And I would say that about any administration. I want them pressed to the point where they have to make their points and back it up. But if they would have responded like this with Obamacare or just name a scandal, these things wouldn't go away like they seem to each and every time.
Okay, but all we have to do is go back and remember when CNN was willing to give Saddam Hussein a pass on what was really going on in that country, so long as they were able to maintain their news bureau in Baghdad. So what you're really talking about, as far as a lot of these reporters go, is how far do I want to push the envelope? Because if I push it too far, they may not give me access the next time, or I may not get asked the question ever again. So because it takes a real unusual president, by and large, to stand up there and know the reporter he picks on is going to ask him a really hard question that he doesn't want to answer, when it's so much easier just to pick the sycophants. And if you tend to be sycophantic, if that's a word, it's certainly easier to get access to the White House. I mean, when she was still at the New York Times, I believe it was Jill Abramson who said this was the most secretive White House that she's ever dealt with. And I've heard plenty of reporters complaining about lack of access to the president, lack of access to his cabinet members, lack of access to everybody in the administration. So I think that may be the balancing act these guys are trying to play. I just don't know if it serves the in fact, I do know it doesn't serve the American people in good stead.
Speaking of serving the American people, having our borders protected and having our Department of Homeland Security keeping things secure. Yesterday, Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson told House Judiciary Committee, we have to deal with in reference to, matter of fact, why don't I just play the exchange for you? It's far more entertaining. And there we go. Thank you.
These 11.4 million are, and we use the words undocumented, they're not here. They're not here in a lawful status, correct?
For the most part, that's correct. Yeah.
No. Are they here in a lawful status or not?
For the most part, that's correct. I mean, some of them can.
Okay, no. Reclaiming my time. Either you can't have it both ways, but I just don't think it's being very honest with the committee to say that there's legal ambiguity here. If there were, this would be a whole different discussion.
Sir,
but I do have a question.
There is legal ambiguity in that they are here undocumented, but there are states that permit them to have driver's licenses. I consider that an ambiguous legal state, and we have to fix it. The system is broken. We're not going to deport 11.5 million undocumented immigrants in this country. You and I both know that. We've got to deal with this population one way or another.
Reclaim my time. Have you heard me say that? Have you heard me say that?
We have to deal with this
population.
population.
Have you heard me say that I would deport 11.4 million people?
But we have to recognize
you heard me,
not going
Mr.
away.
Secretary? Mr. Secretary, I'm not asking you to give a roundabout answer. Have you heard Congressman Doug Collins say that we need to deport 11.4 million people?
No, I have not.
Yes or no?
I'm just loving Doug Collins now. Tell me something,
Well,
Arnold.
I am, and I understand, yes. I love Doug Collins for trying to pin this guy down, but yes, Doug Collins is trying to bail out on it, too. This is the trope or the straw man that these people love to use. How can we, even the people on the right to a large extent, how can we possibly deport 11.4 million people? George Will once wrote a column, the number of buses would go from X to X miles long. And yet nobody talks about rounding up illegals and shipping them en masse out of the country. But I can't help thinking that if we just enforced the laws we had, we could largely alleviate the problem by having these illegals deport themselves. This is a problem that didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to get solved overnight. But the notion that we just have no other choice but to legalize them, and by the way, since you've been doing your show, I don't know, this was a late-breaking item that just came out, but according to the latest news, they are now, the Huffington Post is reporting that the Obama administration plans to let some young undocumented immigrants join the military. They are not undocumented immigrants. They are illegal aliens.
Even when he's golfing, he's ahead of me. I turn it into Ron Burgundy in these interviews, but he brings it. This is why we have Arnold Ahlert. But true, what you just said, everything's true. Everything, you're looking at a logical lens of what those of us who want the rule of law enforced, and what you've just talked about is something you talked about in a previous article about the abrogation of the rule of law. The executive jumping into the Article 1 powers of Congress.
And the great irony of all of this is supposedly people are drawn to this country there because it's a country where we honor the rule of law, not the rule of men. We're not a banana republic so far. But that's the great irony of all of this. These people are coming here, and then they're demanding that we accommodate them, and yet if we accommodate them, what are we really doing but opting for expediency over the rule of law?
Excellent point. Did you hear that Hillary Clinton wrote a book?
Another one?
And
it takes a village to make a president? What?
Something along those lines. I was going to go with the village idiot line, but I said, no, don't do that, Crane. So here's the deal.
Yeah.
This is amazing. What you just talked about with Jane Psaki and the all-star team of geniuses, I think about press access and how Hillary Clinton can write a book and say something and have it repeated as the storyline, never being held to account for the rest of the questions. Here's the example. Roll it.
She says, I will not be a part of a political slugfest on the backs of dead Americans. It's just plain wrong, and it's unworthy of our great country. Those who insist on politicizing the tragedy will have to do so without me. And then she goes on to say about her critics, Chuck, many of these same people are a broken record about unanswered questions, but there is a difference between unanswered questions and unlistened to answers. If there was any doubt, Hillary Clinton's clearly ready to go on offense on this.
There's no doubt at all. In fact, there's a concerted campaign effort.
The former Secretary of State strikes a defiant tone about the attack and all the investigations into it, the attack that led to the deaths of 4 Americans in 2012, including the U.S. ambassador to Libya. She says in that chapter that those who exploit this tragedy over and over as a political tool minimize the sacrifice of those who served our country.
Going on the offense, Benghazi style. Your thoughts, Arnold?
There's no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure a lot of other Americans, that she would like this to be buried sooner rather than later. But the bottom, all you got to know about Hillary Clinton, other than her immortal what difference at this point does it make, was the fact that we had an accountability review board that was supposed to investigate what went wrong in Benghazi, and they were going to do a top-to-bottom investigation, except, gosh darn it, they just never got around to interviewing Hillary Clinton at all. They just thought that for some reason the head of the Secretary of State was somehow not germane to an investigation of the failures of the State Department. I'm at a loss.
I'm at a loss, too, but what gets me is it is a cheering squad that puts this stuff out. And if she wants to go on the offense, why doesn't she get into the arena and actually answer questions? I mean, you referenced the one thing.
She is supposedly going to do an interview
with The View?
With Fox.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Shepard Smith?
That's coming up, yeah. That was released today in the news. And again, partially, I believe it's going to be half and half. I believe with Brett Baer and Greta Susteren. And supposedly she's going to do an interview, but again, we don't know what questions will be off limits or not. I mean, if she's going in there and she's going to answer whatever they ask, then we're going to see a legitimate interview. If she's going to go in there with a lot of these people, Americans may or may not know this, but a lot of times you go to do an interview with a politician and a politician says, I'm going to talk about this, but these, and these, we're not talking about that, and if you attempt to talk about it, I will get up and walk off the set.
I know the headline of the interview is going to be, following the interview, the Brett Baer's War on Women. And why does
Yep. That bears. Well, what are they going to do with Greta, though?
Greta Van Susteren, why does she hate grandmothers? I don't know. Do a Trey Gowdy with her or something. But
it really is just. Listen, they talk about she's answered all the questions, right? Well, I just happen to have up on my handy computer all those questions by Trey Gowdy that nobody answered so far, and he embarrassed the media when he put them in front of him. Here's a couple of them.
Okay,
Can you
about
tell me
30
why
seconds.
Chris Stevens was in Benghazi? Why he was in Benghazi? Does it bother you whether or not you know why Chris Stevens was in Benghazi? Do you know why we're the last flag flying in Benghazi after the British had left and the Red Cross had been bombed? Do you know why requests for additional security were denied? Do you know why an ambassador asking for more security days and weeks before he was murdered and those requests went unheeded? Do you know the answer to why those requests went unheeded? And it goes on and on and on, and every one of those questions he asked has yet to be answered.
Arnold
So the
Ahlert.
notion that she's not going to answer questions on the backs of dead people, who's she kidding?
Arnold Ahlert, thank you. It's just awesome talking with you, and I overuse that like Brett Michaels, but I mean it. It is. Thanks, man. Great to be with you.
We got to play.
Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, AFR Talk.